Hello and welcome to Year 10 Science. Today we are looking at DNA, genes and chromosomes. So far we have looked at inheriting our characteristics from our parents, and we talked about how there are some similarities between your mother and your father that you can perhaps recognize in yourself. We've talked about IVF, and that's a reproductive technology that is available to some people who may have trouble conceiving, and also for some people who maybe possess a family history of some genetic diseases. So that leads us now into looking at our DNA, our genes and our chromosomes that might cause some of those things that we've talked about before. So if we have a look, we are considering, for example, when you're tuning a guitar, the smallest of tiniest tweaks that you might make will make a big difference to the sound that you're listening to. And in books, if we change the words around a little bit, that too will make a big difference in how the story will unfold. So little changes can actually have big effects, and the same applies to our DNA. So our DNA is that molecule that contains our genetic information that we did inherit from our parents. And our DNA gives the messages for our body to build proteins, and that determines how our body functions. So small changes, which we call mutations, can have a big impact. So sometimes we do get mutations, and they might occur because the copying mechanism didn't go through correctly, and so it may not have produced the right proteins that we might need, and that might cause a harmful result. One common mutation that we have looked at recently and heard a lot about in the media is the BRCA gene, which is the breast cancer gene, and that's been now very well studied due to a lot of money that's been put in through a lot of research and fundraising. So if a woman was to have that BRCA2 gene, it increases her risk of breast cancer by 5 to 10 times. So recently we've found that if people have this gene, it does increase their risk, but it also can increase their risk of lung cancer also if they are smoking. So just small little tweaks in that gene can have two very devastating effects. So we're now going to discuss DNA, genes and chromosomes. And the picture that you can see on the screen here is something you've probably seen before. It's a representation of the DNA molecule. And you can see here it looks like a twisted ladder where we have the sides of the ladder, which is made up of a sugar and a phosphate, but the rungs of the ladder are made up of 4 different bases. And it's that order of the bases that occur on our DNA strands that makes you and makes you individual to others. So there can be many different bases in different orders, and that will make different characteristics. Similar to the example we used before where we have words in a book, thinking of these as lots of short little words, put them in different orders. The book is only comprised of 4 words, put them in different orders, and it will make a different story. So if again we were in the classroom, I would be normally asking you to do something that we have done before, which is, what do you know currently about DNA? Where are we working from? Some of us have a good understanding and may have done some reading on DNA before because it's an interest of yours. Others of you may have no idea at all. So in your books, I want you to put the heading DNA. You can stop this video, pop the heading DNA in your book, and I want you just to write down as many things. It could be words, it could be sentences about what you know about DNA. So I'll let you have some time to do that, and then we'll move on. So now that you've done that, we're looking at DNA, which is the building blocks of who we are. What do you know about genetics? So obviously there's a combination between the two there, and it's okay if you don't know much. You might know a little bit. You might know the name of some diseases that may be genetic diseases. You may have heard some words mentioned before, but not really understand much about them. Totally fine. I want you to write down as many things as you know about genetics. And that's the base that we're starting with. And hopefully by the end of this course, you would be able to write extra things there and tell me a little bit more, showing that you've demonstrated some learning there and developed some further knowledge. So the first question we're going to start with is, what is DNA? What are genes? What are chromosomes? So we'll start with a bit of history first, which is looking at the history of this double helix. And the double helix was discovered in 1953 by James Watson and Francis Crick. So they talk about it being Watson and Crick model of DNA. So they were working on this model. People knew about inheritance of characteristics previously, but they didn't know about that double helix model. Rosalind Franklin, a woman working in London, was working at the same time as Watson and Crick. Rosalind Franklin used some X-ray technology to look at the DNA, and found that it was in a double helix structure. But it was really the work of Rosalind Franklin that allowed Watson and Crick to win that Nobel Prize. And unfortunately, that hasn't been particularly recognised until recently. So basically, one of Rosalind Franklin's colleagues gave Watson and Crick her pictures. And you can see in the picture down the bottom, you can see then it makes kind of like that double helixy sort of shape. And one of these colleagues gave it to Watson and Crick, and it was a huge help to them and led them to making or furthering and publishing their results and abandoning their other models they had in favour of a two-strand model. So what does this do with us? And what's it got to do with DNA? So each person has our characteristics. We talked about that when we looked at that first activity, when we were matching up mums and dads and so forth with their children. So our eye colour makes me different to the students in my class, and it's identifiable. And these are called traits. So different variations of a characteristic are known as traits. So if I'm talking about eye colour, there's blue, brown, green, and so forth. If we're talking about hair, we might talk about straight, wavy, curly. We might talk about freckly skin and olive skin. They're all different variations of a characteristic, and they're known as traits. And your traits that you possess are determined by the DNA you have. What I'd like you to do is pause the video and write those two sentences for me, please. Different characteristics are known as traits, e.g., and your traits are determined by your DNA. Now you'll notice there the word is deoxyribonucleic acid. Deoxy, N, nucleic acid. So I made a mistake there. It's deoxyribo is the D, N the nucleic, and the A for acid. Pause the video and write those two sentences down. So, in our body, in every cell in our body, there are 46 strands of DNA called chromosomes. And each one of those chromosomes contain thousands of genes. So, each individual is formed. So at conception, when mum's egg and dad's sperm are united and fertilized and produce a fertilized egg, 23 chromosomes have come from your mother and 23 chromosomes have come from your father from their sex cells during a process called meiosis. So we have 46 chromosomes then in our body cells. In our sex cells, we only have the 23 because they are going to then combine with your partner to produce a child. If we had 46 chromosomes in our sex cells, when they combine then with your partner, you would have 92. So we've got 46 chromosomes in our body cells, so in our skin, in our hair, but in our sex cells, so the sperm and the ovum or egg, there are only 23. Again, I'd like you to write down, please, that middle paragraph. So, our body is a wonderful thing, and it just seems to know what's going on and do it all on their own at any one time. And the source of information is all to be found on our chromosomes, and our chromosomes are located in the nucleus of our cells. So in year 7 or year 8, we have looked at cells, and you would know that the basic structure of a cell has your cell membrane, the nucleus, the cytoplasm. Well, inside our nucleus is where our chromosomes are located. So a string of DNA can be wound up and condensed into structures called chromosomes. One chromosome is made from a single long string of DNA. I want you to write that sentence in your book. So, chromosomes contain an enormous amount of information in our DNA. DNA molecules can be up to several centimeters long, and they contain a whole host of atoms, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, nitrogen, when they're made up. Our genes are just a small segment. Now, our genes can be made up of 3 or 4 bases, remember those rungs on the ladder, or it could be made up of thousands of them. And the order that they occur in is important, and it's what gives you your characteristics. So you can see in this little diagram that I have over here, if here is my strand of DNA, this could be one gene, then this is the next gene. So it's bigger than that gene. It may have more bases in it. Here's another chunk of gene or another piece of DNA which makes up a gene. So we have our DNA is condensed into long strands called chromosomes, and each little section on our chromosomes are called genes. So, first point, chromosomes contain an enormous amount of information encoded in long molecules of DNA, and down the bottom, a gene is a section of DNA molecule which controls one aspect of the way the body grows or functions. So this part here may be what's controlling our eye color, and this part down here might control whether our ear is joined or detached. There's a whole host of genes that control things that you've probably never even thought about before. Now, I think that's probably enough of me talking for today and writing down some notes. The remainder of your instructions are on Compass. We'll talk later. Bye-bye.